Welcome back to the PFC podcast. The views and opinions you are about to hear are the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome back to the PFC podcast. This is Dennis, and today is our 100th episode. And today we got our founding fathers of PFC, if you will. We got Sean, Jamie, Paul. How are you guys doing?
Outstanding. Thanks for having us.
Always good to see you guys.
Sweet. So I think what's was fitting for a 100th episode like this is I'd like to look back at, how did this thing start? What kind of problem sets were happening that caused the creation of this Prolonged Fieldcare Working Group?
Yeah, I guess I can jump on that one. Really, like many good things, there was an operational imperative. It wasn't a good idea. It wasn't that somebody just decided to write some article or do something. And really, it was an operational problem. And so as the medical director for the 10th Special Forces Group, and inheriting the legacy of, about a decade of full deployments into Iraq at the time, we necessarily were very good at tactical combat casualty care. Unfortunately, we had a lot of experience in that, but we were very good at that. We trained to it almost to the exclusion of everything else. And then in the wisdom of the U.S. military, they said, hey, let's take a bunch of folks now that mission is starting to slow down. And let's get special forces back to being geographically oriented. And so en masse, they said the entire 10th Special Forces Group with their 140 plus medics will now deploy routinely to the continent of Africa. And that was a very different problem set. And so the guys were coming back and saying, hey, I am being put in the middle of nowhere. I'm being given one PowerPoint slide, which says what my medical evacuation plan is. And when I dig into it, it's only as good as the digits it's printed on. And so we had to really look at, core special forces training and abilities, and really start to look at how it is that we were going to educate, train, and more importantly, provide support to individual medics that were going out in the middle of nowhere. And so the first thing we had to do was describe that problem. And then we had to get just-in-time training, just-in-time references, just-in-time ways of pushing information out to medics that were going into that operational setting.
Jamie?
Yeah, my personal journey started when Sean approached me and said, hey, have you ever heard about this thing? And I was kind of like, I don't know, prolonged field care. That kind of sounds like what 18 Deltas have been doing for a long time, at least pre-OIF, OEF. And that was dumb of me. I didn't realize at the time how significant a change in thinking this was, because it was different principles, really. And so that became real to me when an E6 18 Delta 10th Group came to me and showed me his medical plan for Africa. In Central Africa. I won't disclose the location, but he showed me his medevac timelines using contracted aviation, and it was anywhere between 24 and 38 hours. And he said, Doc, I'm not the sharpest 18 Delta, but I know for sure that I can't take care of a patient that long in that austere of an environment with multiple aircraft, hops, and everything else. So what can we do to train this and get better at this? And so that was where, originally that's where the strategy, where a lot of higher thinkers were saying, yeah, this is going to be a problem. And where the grassroots problem started arising, where 18 Deltas on teams were looking at the problem set and going, we're not ready for this.
How, I guess, once it became an issue at 10th Group, like how did it get to be more mainstream off of that?
Yeah, so when the Special Operations Medical Association used to meet in Tampa in December, that was our routine time, I presented that to the then president, Bob Mabry, and I said, hey, I appreciate all these TC3 lectures that we've been seeing for the last 10 years at SOMA, but we've got a little bit of a problem over here in 10th Group. And he wisely said, hey, I've got couple of gentlemen that are going to present a case report from a USASOC medic as well as a surgical team that was in Africa, and they're actually going to describe the same thing that you're looking at. I'd like to link you guys up. And so December of 2013, they did a very nice case presentation, and they observed a couple of things. That was Justin and Chris, and we all agreed that at lunchtime, right after their lecture, we were going to get together and invite a handful of people really to sit in on that. And that went from a handful of people. And then the next day we did another ad hoc group, which became the initial Prolonged Fieldcare Working Group. And we just really had an open forum. And we passed around a piece of paper. People put their emails on it. And then that's really when it started, December of 2013.
So obviously, like a lot has moved on since that very beginning. But other than, just gathering a bunch of emails and chatting with each other, how is it you develop something that can actually be pushed out to the masses of SOF anyway?
Yeah, I just wanted to, looking back at some of the early stuff we did, I think I met Jamie at one of our 10th group lunchtime sessions. We had some training sessions that we did, just met at lunch, and we talked about some of these problems, and we got together and just threw some stuff around. And I was one of those E6s that ended up in Africa, along with Justin and some of the surgical guys eventually who got there. And man, we had some really great conversations in those lunchtime sessions and with the surgical team about what we would do if we had a patient, how long could we take care of them, and all the sequelae that would go along with whatever injury we had. And so those, only 2 or 3 medics were getting trained at a time. At the lunchtime sessions, I think we had, maybe 10 or a dozen show up at once. Everybody's busy. But that's what I think kind of spurred the podcast on Justin to start that off.
Yeah, absolutely. And 10th group, just like Paul mentioned, kind of being a medical director, I said, well, at 10th group, we got to just figure this out at a tactical level. Like, what can we do next week for our guys? How can we start training in this? And at the same time, we were looking at this from, the bigger perspective, looking at things that were institutionalized, like tactical combat casualty care. We said, hey, we might need to start looking at this as maybe an additional phase of tactical combat casualty care and looking at it more from the operational strategic level. And we realized that we had a very good informal network of people. And if they didn't have an answer, they could ask 2 or 3 of their buddies. And we had so much deployed experience running around special operations at that time frame, 2013, 2014, that it was not unusual for both medics and docs to have, deployed 4 or 5 times to multiple different environments. And you could just reach out to any one of those people and get any number of clinical anecdotes, which in the absence of literature collecting that deployed experience at that time, it was a treasure trove of good ideas and solid clinical recommendations.
Well, on that note, Sean, as we reflect back, is because medics come up with brilliant solutions all the time. Our medics and corpsmen, that's just what they do. But what was the catalyst that allowed that networking that really made this catch fire? And again, this is to everybody, Dennis, Paul, what do you think it was that made this movement different than a lot of other ideas that just never caught?
I guess from my perspective, I started in the working group a lot later than either of you. I saw, Afghanistan's winding down. Other conflicts are winding down, and the thought in my head was that there's always going to be somebody who is first on the ground, and there's always going to be somebody who's last on the ground, and all those toys that we got used to playing with get pulled away. So how is it I can prepare myself? How is it I can prepare other people that are willing to talk to me about what is that environment going to look like? And as I was kind of getting my own head wrapped around, that's when I first met Paul. First I met you, Jamie, and then you introduced me to Paul. And that's where I got started with the working group. But how do we get others, in mass like they are now? I think it comes from the website. I think it comes from the podcasts, because it's a centralized location. It's outside of the DoD, and like everybody can speak, everybody can put something into it and get far more out of it.
I was going to say it's the original unconventional warfare strategy. Over.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. If you look at who's charged with irregular warfare or unconventional warfare, it's going to be special forces. And that's one of the things that we kind of focused on at the beginning. Like, yeah, it's Africa, it's long timelines, but then if you look ahead to what our bread and butter is supposed to be, this stuff lends itself perfectly to those same environments. And a lot of those things that Sean mentioned before is those things that what can you do next week that we were able to rapidly implement, like the PFC flow sheet or Justin's problem list care plan, or just any one of those number of things. Implementing telemedicine for the first time. You know, in the past when I deployed as a medic, I'd never even thought to call somebody. Just never crossed my mind. You know, maybe that makes me a bad medic, but when that opportunity arose, now you can call somebody. That does take a lot of weight off your shoulders. And those were things that we implemented.
Yeah. I mean, even just think of the training, you know, Paul and I had, and maybe it's the same with you and Jamie, Sean and Jamie, is that at no point during the course was it okay to not know the answer. You know, so at what point is it that you now even consider calling telemedicine, since nobody ever put that into your head, that it was okay that you don't know, that there are people out there that do know, and you can reach out to them.
I got to jump in there because this is one of my soapboxes is like, so first of all, prolonged field care is not magic and it's not soft, right? It's the application of good medicine and best practices. And I said it before, early in the podcast or whatever, if I'm an ER doc, board certified, trained, got a couple thousand shifts under my belt, and I still pick up the phone 3 to 5 times in an 8 to 10 hour shift. And that's just the way that good medicine is practiced. Why wouldn't we do that? Right? I understand that there's a lot of training scars out there. There's a way that we used to train just because that's the way I was trained, right? But why not take best practices and do exactly what we would do otherwise? This is really what it's all about. It's just changing the operational environment where you practice good medicine. But, there's a lot of things that we should be able to do. The problem is all of our medicine generally is going to be siloed into specialties and subspecialties. And then we try to retrofit that into the field environment. And so, and I get it, there's a lot of times we write guidelines and we practice based on lowest common denominators or because we're very risk averse, but that doesn't help the medic who's, trying to deal with his own little medical shit sandwich in the middle of nowhere. And we're not providing him with best practices. So I think you just got to, it comes from providing good guidance and the best thing that we can do for a guy who's in a tough operational situation.
I mean, I think, we've kind of started on, we had this little working group at SOMA that eventually ballooned out to a website, that eventually ballooned out to, blog posts and a few podcasts. By that mechanism, what did all that work ultimately achieve?
Well, I think, we gave it a name, right? We gave kind of a flag to rally around. We said, hey, we got this problem. Whether you have this problem or not, generally SOF is going to be the ones who are describing those problems and innovate. And so we gave it a name. And I think we were humble enough to look for any good ideas and any input that was out there. And I spent just personally probably 2 or 3 years giving essentially the same lecture, showing pictures of Africa and Southeast Asia and just saying, hey, we're out there and we're way out there and we need your help. In fact, I remember flying into MHSRS for about a day because I gave the same lecture to the researchers. And I remember saying, hey, where's Jamie Reesberg? And he waved his hand. I'm like, hey, I got to get on a plane here, but if you got any questions or interest, go find that guy and give him your name. So you're welcome, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. That was a pivotal moment because right after Sean did that, we all crammed into, I don't think the military health system was ready for this. because they gave us a tiny little breakout conference room down there at MHSRS, which has like, thousands of people. Little conference room with 25 seats. And there were people lined up out the hall, out the door. There was probably 75 developers or people from various DoD entities that tried to get in on that question and answer session. And that was actually where Andre Kapp and some of the crew said, well, what do you guys need? And we said, we need good science. We need clinical practice guidelines to back up what our medics are doing in resource constrained environments. And they said, well, give us an example. And we said, well, tourniquet conversion is a known problem. So how about we look at crush? How about we look at TBI in an austere setting when you don't have all your fancy gizmos in the hospital? And there was a lot of and sure enough, what came out of that was the ISR, the Institute of Surgical Research, and now the Joint Trauma System all jumped on board and said, hey, this is an operational medical problem. We think we've got the experts to come up with the solutions, and they did. And that's where the pre-hospital or the PFC CPGs were born through the JTS.
I guess those are two enormous things on themselves, the ISR and the JTS, CPGs. But all those are things. Things are nothing without any kind of mandates. We can create stuff, but if there's no real push to do anything operationally from the commanders who are not medics, there's no there. It's all good ideas, right? So I think one of the big achievements is just how things have changed with DOD or in DHA.
Yeah, I'll just take a step back. When you look at how things work in the military, which is tremendous bureaucracy and moves this, the speed of bureaucracy, which is ironic because now I am one of them, right? But it was kind of funny that we said, okay, we have this operational problem at 10th Group, for instance. Like, I had a guy who is leaving to go to Africa next month. How do I fix that? And Paul wasn't just one of the E6s. He was like the E6 who was like, hey, why don't we just stand up a website? And, it was a unique thing because I realized as a medical director that I'm never the guy who's treating a patient anymore. In fact, the only thing that I do really is sign memos and provide support to the medics, right? And so it just so happened that it was tremendously refreshing that I had made terminal rank at that point, and I honestly didn't care too much about the bureaucracy. And I said, you know what? Screw it. Let's do it. Let's make a website. And then Paul just took it and ran with it, right? I mean, same way, Dennis, like you're running the podcast. I think the job of some of these folks on the strategy side is just provide top cover to let your guys just do what needs to get done. And then, as you say, proceed until apprehended. So, it's just, but getting it out there, but really what we just did was say, hey, how do people communicate, right? How do medics of that generation? Well, it's electronic media, things like podcasts were gaining a lot of momentum at that time. I mean, this is back in 2013. And we said, yeah, it's social media. It's getting on connectivity. And in fact, that's what people had when they were downrange. Everyone has a way to call back home to mama. So why don't we just leverage that, leverage the smartphone that's in their hand, to put this out. And we were very careful as far as making sure there weren't any, operational lines that we crossed or anything like that. But what we figured out was, medicine was medicine. And we tried to embrace what was out there. And by we, I mean, I'm talking about people way smarter than me, or anybody else, but like just enabling guys like Paul and say, yeah, let's run with it. Because in the absence of anything else, we need it. We need it, tomorrow. And that's, I think, was somewhat refreshing. And I'll just continue real quick in that, you got to speak the language of those folks. And so when we were talking to the researchers, it was very interesting because I remember having a phone conversation with John Craig, who's like, the father of all the tourniquet research. And he said, you're telling me that there is a problem with tourniquets, yet as an academic person, there is nothing in the literature. There's nothing for me to point to. If I write a paper, he says, you got to give us something. You got to give us a case report. You got to give us something in the literature that we can point to. And of course, we're soft guys. And we're like, screw that. We're just going to keep solving problems. And you guys just come along for a ride. And at that point, initially I was pissed off. And then whenever somebody has pissed me off about this stuff, I'm like, damn it, we're doing all this work. And then I kind of sat, I thought about it. And then what I realized is whenever somebody pissed me off or challenged me on this, that was an awesome opportunity to take a step back and say, we could be doing this better. And when he told me that, I sat back and I said, you know what? He's right. We need to publish something. We just need to have something in peer-reviewed literature, because that's the language that researchers speak. That's the language that the policy people speak. That strategic communications to those people you're trying to reach was a huge leap. And there's a bunch of great side effects to that. But what we saw was that as we were just publishing things, and we have a lot of friends at Journal of Special Operations Medicine that were like, heck yes, let's jump on this. When we started speaking their language, then we could exponentially reach our, the intended audience and actually give those enablers ammunition so that they could then apply that stuff. And I think that's when things started snowballing, and we've really started, getting some traction outside of SOF.
Yeah, and kudos to Paul on this one, because I remember Justin was struggling with the podcast early on, Sean, like we just couldn't get the technology to work. It just didn't sound good. But for a while, our first couple podcasts, I think it was Justin's wife that did the intro, and Justin was, just pirate radio. But what I would tell you is early on with the website, prolongedfieldcare.org, and the work at SOMA, Paul basically was the rocket fuel. That was the accelerant, because remember how many conferences we'd go to, whether it was Special Operations Medical Scientific Assembly or whatever, pick a conference or pick a meeting, and people would go, well, what is this prolonged field care thing? And we'd just go, here, scan this QR code or go to this website. And so whether you were SOF or not, you basically had to be living in a ditch if you didn't know what was going on with this movement, because the social presence was so pervasive. And so I think that was a huge win in both linking special operations and the conventional capabilities folks that helped get this out into the mainstream, get it to the joint staff up to the Pentagon levels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really comes down to communication, flattening communication. Like you're saying, Sean, researchers, publication is their world, right? And if you can't point me to a study, don't bother talking to me. Likewise, you point a SOF medic at a publication and he's like, that's more than a page and a half. I'm going to do that later on. And so I think through the podcast, through the website, just through certain personalities, we were able to flatten the curve as far as research, things that have been researched and are new or up and coming type innovations in the medical field, flattening that curve to get that out to the masses, to say that this thing right here is worth reading about. Likewise, for the researchers, we can kind of accumulate this knowledge. This is what's happening, and this is a problem that we're trying to deal with. This is something that needs to be researched, or just a situation that needs a look at. And I think being able to bring those two worlds together has definitely benefited more than one person.
Yeah, Dennis, one of the other things I think early on was, I call them the 3 E's of military medicine: environment, equipment, and evidence, or in other words, evidence-based medical practice. And so, like Sean said, we lacked that. We lacked evidence in the pre-hospital space. Where's the study that shows you're supposed to do something this way? And we started digging really hard to find some of that, and it just wasn't out there. Well, the JTS, the Joint Trauma System, rallied. They put some of their best minds and best people on the problem set, and that's why we've just in the last 6 years made the progress we have, which is really cool. That's a testimony to DoD's ability to pivot when you get the right people and the right processes together. But here's what I would say. Here's the flip side. Sean early on made a brilliant decision as we were doing this not to get distracted by equipment. And man, once this became a thing, remember this, guys, in 2014, 2015, and 2016, every organization had they would just slap a PFC label on it. And it could be a tourniquet, it could be a new, field portable Foley catheter, whatever. They would just slap a PFC label on and go, hey, you guys need to buy this. This is specially designed for prolonged field care. And Sean, in his wisdom, said, no, it's not about widgets. It's not about the equipment. This is really a training and an operational context problem. And so let's not get distracted by equipment, innovation, and that kind of stuff. And man, that was brilliant, because we could have gone way down the wrong road. And I don't think we'd be having a conversation today. There probably wouldn't be a podcast today if this just turned into industry inventing a bunch of widgets. And instead we said, let's not think about the technology. Let's think about the principles that medics need to know. Like Paul says, the training, and then think about the operational context, how we get commanders on board. And that's the magic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, training is the key. What have we done in our different schools and our different units to change from, just March and Teach IC to start including, PFC?
I'll start off with that, because when we were doing the website and the podcast and everybody wanted more and more and more, there was only so much that you could get done at the units. And it really takes the battalion surgeons, the battalion senior medics, the PAs, to put that training on. And so you had guys like Doug Powell pushing it from his unit at 4-3, and you had other guys really pushing that stuff forward. And then eventually, when you asked about mandates as well, it ended up in the DODI 1322.24. Somebody put a line in there about developing prolonged field care training curriculum. And I don't know if that was Ed Wade or Monty or, somebody up from up on high, but that's really pushed us to the next level now, to where we've been able to create the prolonged casualty care guidelines that Jamie's working on, and some of this other stuff, because you can do stuff from the grassroots, the ground up, and, to a certain point, and then you're going to hit that wall until you have somebody from the other side pulling you up.
But I mean, I know was 2015, SF Command, we did a test on prolonged field care, and we discovered some things that we'd like to work on. But I mean, have we really noticed a difference? Like, I know, like, the podcasts and the little cheat sheets that makes people feel better about themselves, right? But have we noticed a difference at all in what we've done?
So I'll tell you, I noticed a difference at 10th group, because when I came in, so the NCRC, Chris Moore, the guy who came up with Ruck Truck House Plane, I got a funny story there about publishing I should probably come back to. But anyways, Chris said, man, I remember showing up, and he's like, I want to do good medical training, and I know you're into training. I said, yep. He says, I want to develop a special, just a room, and actually do this training. And it didn't initially pick up because we could never find additional time for medical training, right? And so what I found out is, subsequently, when we're doing this training, even if a guy never saves the life of a multi-trauma patient in Africa, we'll just say, right? What we are able to do is give a name and an imperative to carve out good medical training. And so what we're teaching them in prolonged field care absolutely assists them in regular medicine, sick-home medicine. Simple medical principles that we're reinforcing, and it carves out an additional block of time to do medical training. And what we have found when we are training both medics and non-medics, it's one of the few times that a special operations medic actually can, I'll just say, show off his skills to his other team members and show them what he is able to do as a team member, because they spend a lot of time at the range, a lot of time doing demo, commo. This is an opportunity for them to show off. And it also reassures people that when they do go to the middle of nowhere, they know how to deal with that. So I think it absolutely mitigates risks and enhances missions, even if we don't have hundreds of case reports where PFC training saved a life here or there. It absolutely enables operations.
Yeah, so Sean made a great point there. So Dr. Ramey Wilson, he didn't publish this, which is unfortunate. Super busy guy. He's a professor at Uniformed Services University and a third group alumnus, as I believe both battalion and group surgeon. Anyhow, he came out in 2015 at Fort Bragg, and we did a actual prospective study with volunteer 18 Deltas that showed up, and asked them how they felt they would do on some of these prolonged field care skills. And that can be everything from, advanced surgical procedures like fasciotomy to just basic caring for a critically ill patient for more than 24 to 48 hours. And what we found from that was two things. One, the skill set had fallen into disrepair because guys had gotten so used to the 7-minute medevac easy button in Afghanistan and Iraq that they just hadn't had a chance to maintain their surgical skills and some of those other perishable medical skills. So the other thing we found is that actually 18 Deltas pretty accurately assess, and I'd say all soft medics really, from my experience, accurately assess their knowledge gaps. Because Ramey asked them before they went into the exercise, what are you weak at? And he found about, I want to say it was 80 and 90% correlation overall with what they self-assessed they were not good at. And then de facto, when they were doing the exercise and doing the procedures, what in principle they weren't good at. So it was a great opportunity for our commanders then to hear back and say, hey, when your medics tell you they need some more time to train this stuff, they're not blowing smoke. They really do need time to train this. And so we've gone back and used that data and some of those principles from the Wilson study in 2015 to say, hey, Sergeant Major, respectfully, we do need that 3 days to do a full T-Price-C workup because your medic has self-assessed and assessed his team to say they need some more practice. Now, the unfortunate part, Dennis, is we have not repeated that. I would love to go back and take the same metrics Ramey used in 2015 and repeat that. But I will tell you, Allison Wilson and the crew at West Virginia University are doing a phenomenal job right now measuring 18 Delta and soft medic performance, both how they do pre and post training on a lot of these principles. So I think with her crew up there, Dr. Grabo and Dr. Wilson are going to have some great data for us to look and say, hey, is this helping guys actually save lives?
And I mean, at the, where I work, guys are getting more and more familiar about what actually needs to get done. There's always things that need to be worked on, but as far as the principles, like the basics of things, they're starting to come around, and a lot of the mistakes we made in the past are not being repeated. So that's kind of us moving forward, or up till now, right? Where do we need to go? Like, where are our gaps that need to be filled in?
Where do we start on that one, Dennis? There's so many. I think first off is time. Medicine is a perishable skill. And as Sean has brought up, even as an experienced emergency physician with thousands of shifts under his belt, you're only as relevant as your last quarter or your last 6 months of training. That was the reason, by the way, remember back to our airway paper, why we said we're not going to go down the RSI, rapid sequence intubation road. I get this question from medics all the time. Hey, how come you guys are so into crikes and why don't we do RSI? Well, because you guys don't get nearly enough reps. Half of our emergency physicians don't get enough reps to be proficient at RSI. And that's why we put the white paper out that said crike. Same principle now, Dennis. We really have to double down on making sure we're measuring how our medics and teams are in terms of survivability, and then use that data to give our commanders and say, look, we need to train prolonged field care. We need time to do it. It's time intensive. There's high skill attrition if you're not doing this on a regular basis. In other words, if you're not working in an emergency department or a trauma center, and we need that time to train this in order to save lives. So that's something we're working on. How do we get that data? How do we do those surveys? How do we measure that stuff? But we got to get that information so that commanders can see it, so that command sergeant majors can see it and say, yep, we'll give you some time and we'll give you some money.
Yeah, I think early on, you kind of asked, how was it that, how do we take the approach we took? And I think when people approach me anyways, and I'll use the example of Frank Butler in TC3, he said, hey, do you guys want to roll this under TC3 as the next phase? And I made a conscious decision, at least when he asked me, was not to do that, because I didn't think that we were mature enough and understood enough, and I didn't want to get wrapped into the bureaucracy of watering it down, per se. I said, in order to do this well, we need to pick a relevant customer and write guidelines for a relevant person. And we chose a SOCA medic at the time. And some people said, well, you just relegated yourself to soft. And I said, no, we kept it in the R&D community. We kept it in the agile, community of the most relevant customer, and we think that there will be a lot of goodness that comes out of that from everyone. And so when we talk about prolonged field care in that term, I think, and I won't put words in everyone's mouth here, to say, hey, we're going to keep this on the special operations side of things. We're going to keep this in the community. We're going to keep it at the think tank of the Special Operations Medical Association from a pure PFC standpoint, so that we can continue to push the envelope, and then hopefully other communities will be able to benefit from that. And then I think then Jamie took on the Herculean task of socializing this both with the Tactical Combat Casualty Care Committee, as well as running with the whole Prolonged Casualty Care Working Group. So that's kind of, that's been a huge shift and a tremendous asset to the entire medical community. I'll turn it over to Jamie since he's the man.
No, not at all. I just work for him. But yeah, like Sean said, man, none of this happened. We just happen to be the talking heads. But behind like everything that's happened, all the goodness here, Dennis, that's all medics. That's all SOCMs. That's Ranger medics. That's 18 Deltas. That's MARSOC, SOIDCs coming up with amazing solutions, not to leave NSW out. They still come up with some amazing solutions too. Actually, we just heard a couple of them from an unnamed SEAL medic a couple weeks ago at USU's gunpowder exercise. But here's the key. Early on, as Sean said, the definition said special operations combat medic or higher. And you know what conventional did? Conventional, in a well-meaning effort, said, well, we're just going to take SOCM out of the definition of prolonged field care and just say medic. Any medic can do this. And we said, words have meaning, and it's really important to understand why Sean and the original founders said SOCM medic is the bare minimum that should be doing prolonged field care. There's a lot of reasons for that. That's beyond the scope of this podcast. But the key part was when the Joint Trauma System and the Defense Committee on Trauma said, hey, we think we need to look at this problem as well. We threw out the old prolonged field care definition because that is soft-centric, yes. But what we did was we said, okay, let's nest this in something conventional knows and does well, i.e. tactical combat casualty care, T-TRI-C, and then run with it from there. That way we could create a new definition that didn't rely on the SOCM medic, but also allowed for skills that were appropriate for the conventionally trained medic and corpsman. Because what we didn't want to do is, like Sean said, we didn't want to dilute what soft medics were doing. Soft medics to this day are the only medics that get clinical rotations in trauma centers. It's only special operations medics that do that. Conventional medics and corpsmen don't actually touch live patients before they graduate. So we believe that's a critical part of that skill set for prolonged field care. And now this is the key point. If you hear nothing else out of this podcast, because there's going to be a lot of confusion in the next 4 years. Prolonged field care has been, is, and always will be a special operations thing. Prolonged casualty care, PCC, is the conventional spin-off of those same principles, but it's adapted to the breadth of all the services so that all the services can agree. Soft, we're smaller, we're lighter, we can be more agile with what our medics do. But conventional needed something a little bit broader to capture those medics. Hopefully that makes sense with that explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't paint this with too broad of a brush because you miss the context of the problem, right? Just like, I have a certain well-defined skill set, and I'm able to take care of a type of patient, versus, a provider like, Doug Powell. He is able to take care of somebody who is, as long as he has the supply and logistics behind him, he is able to take care of somebody, in a much different type of patient. You know what I mean? Versus, conventional medic. Not that they're bad, it's just that they do not get the amount of training that we get straight out of the pipeline. You know what I mean? So their context of what they're capable of doing is going to be just different.
Yeah, and this brings me to the the story. So I was, I had my blinders on, and I said, this can only be done by an independent practitioner, somebody that makes diagnosis, has a formulary to treat, has a certain amount of surgical skills. And it was the rest of you guys that showed me the model that Paul had built, at OSW with the SOFAC, Special Operation Forces, austere, cure, of course, there it is. Yeah, SOFAC, right? And so, but basically what they did was they were taking non-medics, had not gone through a medical pipeline at all, giving them wilderness EMT, and then giving them a few weeks of basic clinical and prolonged field care training. And I had the pleasure of proctoring a couple through a full, prolonged field care scenario to include mass cows, to include advanced surgical procedures. And I was absolutely shocked at their ability to handle it using prolonged field care guidelines and clinical practice guidelines and all that. And what it showed me was that this isn't necessarily magic. This is good medicine, right? And so when I presented this to civilians, they said, "Oh my God, you're doing that crazy soft stuff." I said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm asking them to take 3 sets of vital signs and chart them. I'm asking them to do a problem list. I'm asking them to do something like do BVM correctly to apply PEEP. Those are crazy soft things." And they're sitting there looking at me like, no, you guys are doing. And I said, "No, we're just doing good training. We're training them in this stuff, and we're putting them in that situation." And what does the training truly do? It doesn't make you an ICU doctor. It doesn't make you a surgical specialist. You can never be an expert in PFC. What the training does is exposes them to an operational situation that gets smart type A individuals. It gets their imagination going. And you don't have to point out anything that they didn't do well, because they'll be beating themselves up for the next 3 weeks, but they'll sure as hell start looking for that and saying, "Man, the next time I see something like that, I want to be more prepared." And then where can you go to get more prepared? You read more, go back to this podcast, look on the website, or use any of the many links that are on pfcare.org to get yourself to be smarter. And all we're doing is we are introducing to an operational situation that maybe they hadn't considered before, whether it be medics or non-medics. So we've seen team leaders and team sergeants go through training, and they say, "Whoa, okay, now I see what this is going to take. This is not a medical problem. This is an operational problem." And once they're exposed to that, it really changes the way people think and plan for missions. And that's been particularly satisfying. It's not just about SOCA medics. It's about everyone that's stuck in that situation.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Sean. So, early on, Sean and Justin and Paul had some really brilliant axioms, PFC truths that were based on the soft truths. And as we've seen PFC catch on as a problem set well outside of special operations, and everybody's doing it, whether it's wilderness or NGOs or whoever. And a lot of those folks have been doing it for a long time, and there just wasn't necessarily a label attached to it. But now there's codified principles. There's things that we validated that exist in the prolonged field care realm. The huge part about this, though, was making the decision early on to say, you're not going to get certified in PFC, because in our commanders' minds, that means, oh, okay, I don't need to put a surgical team or a critical care doctor there because I've got PFC certified medics, so they can keep those patients alive, and I don't really need a surgical team. So Sean and some of the early planners astutely said, we don't want to go down that road. That's a really dangerous way to think. Well, just get our whole team, get the whole ODA PFC certified, and then we won't need a surgical team. Absolute hogwash. And so when we go back to those soft truths, most special operations require non-soft support. And you have to have those. We still need our forward surgical teams and all the clout that the Joint Trauma System and DoD medicine has in the inventory to save lives. PFC just provides that capability for those particular areas where you do need to mitigate loss of life and you don't have the ability to put the level of care that you wish you had.
Most of what it comes down to is just being a master of the basics. I've never, very, very rarely have I ever seen an advanced technique be the key to survival. It was always, getting an IV, splinting properly, thinking forward to these are the things that can go wrong. I'm going to have a plan for those things before they happen. And those are the things that usually catch people off guard and, and ruin their day is just, it's not an advanced thing. It's just, they're not used to thinking that way. Like they're used to the, 20-minute medevac, or, like when I was downrange, you'd be hard pressed to finish March before you could hear the helicopter blades coming overhead. And obviously it's different now. So it's all those things that you did that you thought made you a hero. Other people had to pay the price for that. So I think that prolonged field care also kind of exposes those problems that you were creating as a medic, because now you get to deal with it. That's another aspect of things, is that guys are realizing that nothing in life is free. All those invasive things you did very early and without maybe thought, right? You get to pay the price for it, in the next couple hours.
Yeah, you reap what you sow physiologically.
Yeah, absolutely. So, even something like just snow them with ketamine, right? Well, you get to pay for that pretty shortly, and it may be a long time, it may be a short period of time, but you're going to pay for it one way or the other. I don't know. Is there anything else you'd like to think about as far as moving forward? What can we do to achieve more, I guess?
Well, I don't know. We talked about in a recent podcast, just going from, the Prolonged Fieldcare Working Group through Prolonged Fieldcare Collective. And, what does that mean? I don't really think that, as I said, from the end user standpoint, it really makes that big of a difference. I think I would encourage folks to, when people say, how can I get involved, to reach out and continue to present problems, continue to present challenges. One thing that we love receiving is case reports. So if people hear about case reports, because that's really what drove us, the crush CPG, the first crush syndrome, it wasn't like because we were seeing, whole platoons getting taken out by buildings collapsing on top of them. It was because people said, hey, we had this tourniquet that was left on too long. And what do I do with that? How do I convert a tourniquet? And as we looked at it physiologically, we realized it was basically the same physiology as crush syndrome physiology, but it came from a clinical, a very famous anecdote that happened in Africa, where we said, wow, this is a gap in the literature. There is nothing out there. And that's how we were able to focus those type of clinical guidance and projects based on, real life clinical anecdotes. We don't have huge case series. We did report on 54 cases of prolonged field care, which basically validated the fact that they are very variable, that we need to be master of basics of certain capabilities to deal with the variable clinical presentations, and that education and training should be foremost to prepare people, for prolonged field care type situations. So, again, I'll put in a plug for SOMA. The SOMSA meeting is coming up here in a couple of weeks. That is, I think, besides being the most interesting medical society in the world, it is also the incubator for much of the pre-hospital and trauma surgery and resuscitation, efforts that have gone on over the last, 20 years, because you have some of the most innovative thinkers with real problems and real experiences that bring their problems to that group. And so, that's where a lot of these things started. It may not be, prolonged field care might not be a thing. There's a few different efforts that have come out of SOMA in that think tank. And so I just encourage folks to get involved. And if you're, a junior medic and you're seeing these things going on, jump on a problem, get involved with something, really dig into it. Go to your supervisors, go to your senior medics, go to your docs and PAs and say, hey, I'm seeing this issue or this problem. Because really, I think, our job as medical directors is to listen to those medics and then enable them and give them the tools to be able to, solve these tough problems and really vet out what's going on. And, I've always taken that as a point of pride, as being able to support my guys and try to work with us. So prolonged field care, I think, is just one of those examples.
Yeah, to steal a little bit from, Maximus, right? What we do here echoes in the afterlife. If you really want to engage on this problem set, publish, write something. And we've got medics doing that all the time. They get written, they grab a doc, partner up, and that stuff gets published in the Journal of Special Operations Medicine or other locations. And that's a great way for your legacy to continue, for all of the solutions and work you've been doing as a team guy, or as a medic teaching or training other medics. It's a great way to get it out there into the ether so that, those principles and TTPs you've developed and worked so hard for 15 years or 10 years or 3 years, whatever, are out there for people to use and share. So can't say enough about trying to do exactly what Sean said, partner up with someone. Publication is not a difficult process. It just requires some persistence. But that's what takes the difference from thinkers to thinker doers. And that's really what we need. That's why PFC was successful, is it's thinker doers. It wasn't just a bunch of people sitting around admiring a problem, as Sean likes to say, at a Special Operations Medical Association conference. There was action afterwards. They identified the problem and they said, we're gonna own this, and we're gonna be responsible for generating solutions. And that's what's happened over the last 8 years.
Let's see, Paul, are you on? Do you have any parting tidbits?
No, but that does bring up the part where the PFC Collective, now that we've renamed us to that, what's your thoughts on if a medic wants to get involved?
Usually when somebody does come to me and say, I want to be involved with whatever it is on the podcast or the website or however they want to get involved, usually it's, unless they're bringing me an idea, then I'll ask them to help something, right? And it's kind of like, work gets you your freedom. So if you, do something and actually come through with it and finish a project, then, we will welcome you into the committee. You'll start off as like I forget the term that we picked, but like a helper bee, and we don't really put much work on anybody really, but you do that for a year and then you become like a voting member. But that whole process, that whole initial process, is just so we can get the guys that, we want everybody, but not everybody is one of those thinker doers, so we don't really need a bunch of people thinking about things. We need people that are willing to do things. So that's kind of the vetting process, is you're going to do something.
Hey, Dennis, one last thing. It's interesting to me, Sean said, I don't know how DOD is going to look at this as a future problem set, but I'll tell you, anybody that's reading open source news about Ukraine right now should absolutely embrace prolonged field care. They are living it right now, this minute, in Mariupol, right? With thousands of people under siege, underground, with injuries, trying to sustain life without surgical support, right? There have been numerous vignettes over the last 5 to 6 weeks, open source media, again, coming out with people that were stuck or trapped in their houses after artillery blast wounding, shotgun blasts, that it took 10 plus days to make it, just because of the tactical situation, to a hospital and get surgery. How are we collecting that data? How's that getting out there? So that's another future challenge for our collective, is continue to build that network so we can data mine what some of the great NGOs and what the courageous folks are doing on the ground right now. Because when we don't have a DoD theater trauma system in place, what I'm finding is we don't really have a great way to capture what's going on, what their surgical survival rates are on the ground right now. And that's a gold mine of information. So this is a plea to anybody that does listen to the podcast that may have a way to sort of connect that. And that could take the form of, artificial intelligence, deep learning algorithms that comb that media to find those prolonged care cases that are happening on open source right now. So, but if you don't believe this is a future problem set, just watch the news or listen for 30 minutes and I think you'll get it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's another thing through COROM, that program that Paul and I are involved in. They have providers connected all over the world. And right now we're working on getting our podcasts and blog posts translated into a variety of languages. So we can at least provide information to those people on the ground wherever they are in the world. And I think through those same types of connections, that's where we find that data, is the providers, just being able to talk to the providers on the ground. I think it's going to be, like you said, it's going to be a gold mine versus, social media posts, which may or may not be real.
Yeah, this discussion's got me thinking about a couple things. So we may be able to put the patient data, the information that we collected for the cases of prolonged field care when we looked at those. We may be able to put that up, for instance, on the website. See if we can start getting some de-identified patient data to look at. I mean, it'll be anecdotes, but I think it'll be better than what we got right now. And if this is happening, Jamie makes an awesome point there, and we need to do that. So. Good stuff. Hey, one thing I was kind of amazed at when I asked Dennis and Paul kind of just what the stats are, visits to the website and how many people download the podcast. Can you guys give a brief, overview, kind of the stats of where we're at right now with prolonged field care products?
Yeah, I think I've got a couple of those off the top of my head. We definitely hit over 1 million hits a while back. We have 17,000 email subscribers to the website itself. So if we put out a blog post, it goes directly to the inboxes of 17,000 people. When we're not putting out a blog post just on a day-to-day basis, we usually get about 10,000 visits a day or a month. Yeah, 10,000 visits a month. What else? Our social media has depending on which one you're looking at, 10 to 20,000 people. Followers on those. So I think we're able to reach out and inform a lot of people at the same time, which is pretty useful. Now, I'm pretty judicious about what I put out there. I don't try to flood people's inboxes with a bunch of meaningless blog posts. And then I'm sure Dennis can talk about the podcast also.
Yeah. So just watch time on YouTube, which I started last year. Our YouTube channel, we have about 17,000 hours of content consumption. And that's spread over here. Just a second. I mean, views. A bunch. How about that? Just the podcast itself is being looked at over 60 different countries. So we're reaching a very, very large audience. And obviously it's being consumed, right? And I mean, we've all been to the Norway or the Swedes or the Germans or any of those types of training. They all know, like, the Prolonged Field Care website, the working group. They include those things in their types of training, and I think that's multiplied around the world at different countries. Not just military, you also have civilian, firefighters, border patrol. I mean, the list, I think, can go on. I think when it comes to pre-hospital care and people having to do that for an extended period of time, I think a lot of people come to our website, even though it's, soft specific. Like Sean said, it's just principles, like it's just good medicine, and that anybody with that capability can provide it.
Yeah, we'll throw in a shameless plug there, since PFC Collective is being supported by a nonprofit organization. With that kind of reach, I was absolutely amazed, like that potential reach. And so we're always looking for donations, sponsors, and that type of thing. So if folks are passionate about this the way we are, in order to sustain this and to kind of build the services that we can provide, there's opportunities for donations as well as sponsorships. So more information coming in the short term, but I think that's just tremendous. And that is a testament to the amount of work that Dennis and Paul and the community has put towards this. So, the reason why this stuff is successful is, there is a coalition of the willing, but in any group, there are probably only a few thinkers and doers. And, I kind of stepped back for a few years, but Dennis, Paul, Jamie, all y'all, I mean, just crushing it. So keep doing good stuff, and we hope to be able to continue to support that effort.
Yeah, looking forward to the next chapter. Plenty of challenges on the horizon. We haven't even gotten into space and cyber and what do some of these other future domains look like with these same principles of medicine that we've, pioneered in prolonged field care. So exciting chapter to come.
I mean, we've just scratched the surface, and everything is being updated as you speak. So those are just more topics that have to be updated. I think another thing I'd like to do is start kind of showing people what a prolonged field care scenario actually looks like, and just put myself through a PFC scenario just to show people, what happens. You forget, you train and train and train, and then you realize like you just used your last needle, right? So, what do you do?
I'll pay to watch that, Dennis, if you crack yourself with a butter knife. This will be really cool.
Reuse needles like a cracker or something like that.
That's what hand sanitizer's for.
But I'm only getting into Space Force, or if I get a funny hat. I want a funny hat to wear.
There's all Space Force hats are funny looking, right? But yeah, Paul, do you have anything to close us out with?
No, the last thing I'll say is everything goes back to training and those principles. I think I realized that during that 2015 exercise, I wrote a blog post about it, and I've only expanded and kind of distilled some of those principles down even further. So I'll do a shameless plug for myself. I'll be giving the PFC update at SOMA on May 6th, so I'll be out there talking about that a little bit more. But a lot of these things you can embrace, and once you're a master at March and you're a master at some of the basic clinical medicine physical exams, I think that can really help you out. And then you can move on to some of the PFC principles and adopt those instantly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it always comes down to being a master of the basics. Cool. Well, thank you all very much for jumping on the line.
That's it for today's podcast. Be sure to go to our website, www.prolongedfieldcare.org. Find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Subscribe and stay on the bleeding edge of combat medicine. This is Dennis for the PFC Podcast. Out.
Boy, it's waiting there for you.